Hello everyone, my name is Mark Rivers. The topic I will be discussing today is the apartheid. I would like to begin with a quote by Nelson Mandela. For to be free is not to merely cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the rights and freedoms of others. Apartheid was present in South Africa for many years, but the 1980s brought international attention to the violations of human rights for black South Africans. As the apartheid sustained the suppression of the South African people, a new government reform was placed, which increased the aversion from the South Africans, which dismantled the apartheid. There is no justification violating the rights of others. We must all have the freedom to choose. I know I'm an incredible person to discuss this topic because I visited South Africa firsthand and I was able to witness many historical sites involved during the apartheid regime. That being said, I bring this along to my first point. The apartheid was a system of legal segregation enforced by the National Party government in 1948 to 1944. Black South Africans were forced into poverty and into communities called townships. Also, black South Africans had to walk around with passports and other identification cards to make sure that they were in the right place at the right time. The white South Africans were called Afrikaans with a K. The black South Africans were called Kafirs, which is a derogatory term stated in Mark Mathurin's book, Kafir Boy. And the light-skinned South Africans were called colored, which were the mixed South Africans. Now that we understand what the apartheid is, we can go to my next point. People's aversion toward the government reform by the National Party. The National Party induced a reform in the government, which was comprised of a tricameral government, which meant a three-chamber government. This was comprised of the House of Assembly, the House of Representatives, and the House of Delegates. The House of Assembly was the white representatives. The House of Representatives were the colored representatives. And the House of Delegates were the Indian representatives. Blacks had a powerless role in the government. There were mass strikes and protests held based on this reform by the National Party government. Moving right along to my third point. During the 1980s, the apartheid was breaking down to a result of increasing internal and international pressures and worsening economic difficulties. The Soweto uprising was a riot in the Soweto township due to education reform that young black South Africans wanted in order to get the same educational privileges as white South Africans. People and governments around the world campaigned for a boycott of South Africa. Now that we understand this, we can move right along to my conclusion. As a result of the action taken by the African National Congress, voices of millions of oppressed were heard around the world, which brought an end to the system of legal segregation known as the apartheid. The 1980s was a time that brought international aid to South Africa that shed light on an area stricken with racial segregation, which influenced the interactions with racial groups for future generations. Freedom is not always a luxury for all, so we must take advantage of it and give it to those who lack the freedom to emancipate themselves. The visual that I wanted to show the class was this picture with young South Africans with a sign that says "Bury the Apartheid." The thing that made the apartheid so unique was that the young black South Africans were so adamant about their freedom, and they were involved in the government protests as well, more than anyone.